Yeah, great. Thanks, Jane. My name is Troy McCollum. I'm Chief Implementation Officer for the Reagan-Udall Foundation. My primary responsibility is to oversee the IMEDS program. IMEDS is, by the way, where's the clicker? Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
she took it with her, sorry.
That's okay. IMEDS is an acronym for Innovation in Medical Evidence Development and Surveillance. Really, that's just a fancy way of saying what we're trying to do is find ways to improve the safety of marketed pharmaceutical products and medical devices. Now, on the surface, this seems pretty straightforward. We certainly have been analyzing very complex data sets for many decades now. But the world is very different today with the introduction of quote-unquote big data. It's really has been a game changer. Now, before I put up the next slide, I'm going to say that I'm normally not a fan of putting up cartoons in a presentation. However, I'm kind of breaking my own rule this time because this does really say it all. When we're thinking about, why is this so complicated? We're getting more data and in an unprecedented fashion than ever before. But the reality is, getting it is not necessarily the hard part. Using it is the hard part. Just based on, or by virtue of the volume, it's not called big data for no reason. The speed at which this data is collected with all the technologies that are available, and the variety of data which we now have access to in terms of the different formats and styles, it's extraordinarily complicated. So as we look at that, we have discovered that there are a number of important gaps in national safety surveillance. Currently, there is no home for this methods research and discovery in the uses of new data and techniques to support post-market safety surveillance. In other words, they're scattered across many competing centers and involve many different experts. There is also no supported mechanism, certainly not an efficient one at any rate, for broader stakeholder participation in using the national tools that are available through, or the tools that are available through the national resource of Mini-Sentinel. And thirdly, there are very few opportunities for practical hands-on training in using electronic healthcare data for surveillance. So thus, the introduction and the launch and ongoing activities of the IMEDS program. And to address each of these three gaps, we've identified three key programs that are important in terms of addressing those. First of all, there's IMEDS methods, and as the name would imply, this is really the home where we are developing and improving the scientific methods used in this field of research. And that has been, or was, the initial focus. Now, since the launch of IMEDS methods, we have moved on into other areas. The second pillar of the IMEDS program is IMEDS education, and this is really critical, I'm sure, as everyone will understand, in terms of training our scientists in order to improve this field of research. We had the OMOP IMEDS Scientific Symposium back in November of last year, and there were about 200 people in the room, but I can tell you that there were only a fraction of individuals in that room who truly understand the core science, and we're looking to change that through IMEDS education. The third pillar is IMEDS evaluation. And this is really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. This is where we will take the methods that have been applied and use those in the actual active safety surveillance. Now, you probably have heard hopefully have heard of IMEDS before. You probably have heard of Sentinel before. But there are a number of different programs, and we wanted to just throw up a slide that kind of talks you through how are some of these programs similar? How are they different? First of all, IMEDS is building upon the considerable progress that was made through two separate initiatives. The first is Mini-Sentinel, which of course is FDA's program and was launched back as a result of FDAV in 2007. The second is Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership, or OMOP, which at the time was intended to be industry's response to Mini-Sentinel. OMOP was originally managed by the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, but as always was planned, OMOP moved over to the Reagan-Udall Foundation at the time that Reagan-Udall was really ready to take on that program. That occurred back in the kind of the second, third quarter of last year. And then more recently, there's a program called Odyssey, or Observational Health Data Sciences and Informatics, which is basically comprised of a group, to a large extent, legacy OMOP investigators. And they're working on evidence-based risk identification and comparative effectiveness. In terms of the benefits to the stakeholders, the various stakeholders with the IMEDS program, they're vast and they're important. And the first, as Ellen already pointed out, we're operating in the spirit of full transparency. I think a really good example of that is when we created the IMEDS methods research agenda last year, continuing into the first part of this year. We did receive input from virtually every stakeholder imaginable, and it was all really good feedback as well that we got. And what that told us is that the research agenda, which of course will be an evolving agenda, but to get things kicked off, we did have the support of FDA, industry, and a variety of other stakeholder groups as a result, in large part, to our transparency in the way in which we operate. The IMEDS Research Laboratory, which is formerly the OMOP Research Laboratory, it provides researchers with access to numerous and diverse data sources to conduct the research that's important to them and to the field of science. There are, of course, opportunities to collaborate with data partners. There are, I believe, 17 data partners who are part of Mini-Sentinel. There are a number of others who are also involved in this area, and we're able to create an area of collaboration with our researchers among the data partners. There's also engagement with the diverse group of research participants, and this is important because as we look to expand this field, we do need diversity in terms of how we will grow it and improve it. And number 5, but certainly not least, Reagan-Udall's affiliation with FDA does enable alignment to ensure that the work that we're doing within IMEDS and frankly across all of Reagan-Udall more broadly is in fact in alignment with FDA and meeting FDA's needs. So in closing of the opening part of our IMEDS presentation, I wanted to just walk you through some of the important accomplishments that we have been able to achieve over the last year or so, a little bit more than a year. In October 2012, the IMEDS Organizing Committee was convened, and that committee was convened, again, as Ellen pointed out, a very diverse group of individuals to help us understand how we were going to govern IMEDS, what our mission was going to be, our vision, and so forth. We're very grateful for the work that organizing committee did because they were extremely helpful in getting us to the next stage, and that is developing the IMEDS Charter, which of course carried out everything that committee had worked so diligently and tirelessly on. In the summer of 2013, as I mentioned before, we completed the transition of the OMOP program to IMEDS. We actually did that in a much shorter time period than was originally planned, but as we looked at the work that was being done within OMOP and where we wanted to take IMEDS, we felt that it was important to move on that more aggressively, and we were certainly able to accomplish that. We also selected and convened the IMEDS Steering Committee. The steering committee from a governance structure really should be looked at as having program oversight for IMEDS. Moving on into the fall of 2013, we selected and convened the Scientific Advisory Committee. So while the steering committee is responsible for programmatic oversight, the Scientific Advisory Committee is really responsible for scientific oversight, as the name, of course, would imply. We also convened a small group of individuals, but diverse group of individuals, to help us launch the IMEDS evaluation program. And I've got a few words to say on IMEDS evaluation later in this presentation, so I won't get into that at this point. Earlier this year in January, we were able to finalize the very first IMEDS methods research agenda. And again, we had feedback and involvement from many different stakeholder groups. And what we're doing now, work has begun on 7 of the 12 research projects that were identified as part of kind of phase 1 of our IMEDS methods research agenda. We have issued our first request for proposal, so that was certainly a major milestone within the IMEDS program. And the IMEDS evaluation pilot project is beginning to take shape as well. So thank you for that. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Alec Walker.
Okay, thank you, Troy. Let's see. There we go. I'm Alec Walker. I'm an epidemiologist from Boston, and I serve as the scientific advisor to Troy. And my principal responsibility in the beginning was to begin to pull together our research agenda, which was a matter of synthesizing a wide range of views of stakeholders and participants in the genesis of IMEDS, and then as we moved into formally having a scientific advisory committee. We've been guided in large part by the overriding idea that we're supporting the FDA's mission, and indeed the sort of the nidus around which the research agenda got put together was a very helpful and extensive memorandum from the agency on what it saw as its research needs moving forward. I think we can think of there being 3 big domains of the program right now. The first is creating a collaborative environment which welcomes in active researchers from many different domains. We've got academics and FDA staff and industry in this now. And we'll talk about a little bit more in the second in the IMEDS lab. But this is maybe the biggest inheritance from OMOP in a sense, and that's the notion of there being a community that, as long as we keep this focused on a few people or a few organizations, that the chance of its flourishing and more importantly the chance of its being adaptable and forward-looking becomes pretty small. There was a more substantive part of the OMOP legacy. There had been a comprehensive series of evaluations which got to be called the OMOP experiment, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, which gave rise to some places where one ought to pause about thinking about the use of big data in support of regulatory decision making as opposed to research activities. And then the final domain in our agenda is being more forward-looking. So the IMEDS laboratory is the core of the really open collaboration. This is a cloud-based computing system which currently houses a variety of large, very large data sets, mostly of insurance origin, and which is slated to expand. It can handle essentially an unlimited amount of users as far as the architecture is concerned. There are some cost issues, but the nature of cloud computing is you can expand and contract your demand according to your usage. You don't have to have your own dedicated supercomputer. This is not just a home for data, but it's one of the big areas in the evaluation of large data is how you put it into a usable format, and especially when you're beginning to look to similar data from many sources, you have to create something called a common data model if you're not going to do a large number of separate studies. And the translation of data into the common data models has been an object of activity in research. There's there's several ones that are out there. We are actively hosting 2 important ones, the one used by Mini-Sentinel and the one developed by OMOP, which have many points in common, but they're not the same thing. and we're certainly open to taking in others. We have on the system analytic software that people can use, and a technical support staff. It indicated that we already have a wide range of users, and the basic arrangement is that you apply to use the lab, and anybody with the scientific qualifications and a credible project, which is examined in outline, that is in a couple of page summary, not in a full protocol, is welcome in. There's the entrance really is being willing to be transparent. That is, there's no secret work that's done there. And you have to be at least consonant with the IMEDS and RUF missions. And non-commercial in the sense, and this, of course, if you work for a publicly traded company, what is it that you do that's non-commercial? Non-commercial in the sense of not being particularly in promoting a particular product, but addressing a common issue that's that we're facing in the medical product safety environment. You make application. This is passed on by staff, read by the scientific advisory committee. You're welcomed into the lab. You're given $1,000 worth of computing time, which is plenty to do a fairly complex project. So that it's and that sort of comes with your welcoming in, and this is, in a sense, part of the whole support structure that we're offering. We've gone. The part of consolidating the legacy of what we're doing is now dealing explicitly with some of the consequences of the OMOP experiment. As I mentioned, that raised questions about when can you rely on these data? Are there issues of replicability between different data sources, different analytic techniques, different seemingly small variations in definition that would be within the domain of scientific credibility? The OMOP investigators had posed some solutions in terms of adjusting for variability and things like that. This was sort of laid out as a question in front of the research community. And we've taken that seriously as part of our inheritance in supporting the agency, because of course the agency proposes to rely on the Sentinel data ultimately for assistance, at least, in making regulatory determinations. You really have to know how accurate your measuring instrument is. We've gone down into the weeds in terms of setting up projects to look at the actual structure and implications of the common data models, how you translate the administrative data that comes from these various sources into something that's a recognizable disease definition, not just a code ticked off on a form. We're actually looking to carry over OMOP results in a mini-Sentinel form, and mini-Sentinel results, which have already been published, in OMOP structured data, and then to looking for discrepancies and anomalies, so create a program of devising examples to really test them. It's work that just really has to be done, because you can't operate under the cloud of this kind of credible critique if it's so broad that it paralyzes you. So we need to kind of focus down and say, well, where is this cogent and where is this something that you can set aside in a particular instance? And there are surely examples of both. Go back. Looking into the future, we realize that in a sense, even though I talk about cloud computing and the like, that we're a lot of what we have at the core of the lab is what you'd have to think of as late 20th century technology and analytic techniques, and that there's big well-organized data systems with good structured components and classical epidemiology updated with multivariate statistics and the like. But there's a lot happening now that goes well beyond that. And we're looking into the future, and some of the projects that are in the research agenda that are of the 7 that we haven't already started on have to do with issues around patient-reported data and how you can incorporate both voluntary data and even, as you know, the agency is using social media data for some purposes. Where does this fit into a kind of a scientific view of assessing drug safety? Looking at techniques for doing ongoing surveillance. You're probably aware of issues around syndromic surveillance and bioterrorism. Well, there's an ongoing surveillance question within drug safety as well. And when can you do this? And when the key here is not to be overwhelmed by false positives, that is, signals that turn out to be nothing because they are hugely consuming of resources, but at the same time being sensitive to issues that are going on. We're adapting, or continuing to adapt techniques to the fact that we work in a distributed research environment, that we're going to be working with data holders who are not going to give up their data, but are going to be willing to do queries on our behalf, and then how do you integrate that into a sensible research program, and how do we set up standards for doing all of this. So all of these are top of mind right now. Last week we convened our scientific advisors for a face-to-face meeting in which we're sort of pushing further on this, but I think we've got our current marching orders in place and for the next 6 months as well. This is just a listing of some of the projects that are ongoing now under the IMEDS methods. I won't go them in detail, although certainly in the break or after the meeting, I'm happy to talk about any of them in any detail to people who are interested. And with that, I'll turn it back to Troy for IMEDS evaluation.
Alec, can you mention that the drawing really research agenda is all on our website?
I was just about to do that.
Okay.
Great minds think alike, or at least ours do. Yeah, as Jane was just indicating, and I was going to say, the research agenda, the charter, basically every document that we create is available on the website. If you'd like to take a look at it, familiarize yourselves with the composition of the research agenda, and as Alec pointed out, we're certainly happy to answer any questions at any time. And furthermore, we've always talked about or referenced it as the IMEDS research agenda, but as we've discussed internally, the reality is this is a living document. As we encounter new research findings, as we engage even other stakeholders that we haven't already engaged, this will be an evolving agenda. And so we do anticipate updating it once or twice a year. So we'd like to wrap up today's discussion of the IMEDS program by talking to you about that third pillar of the IMEDS program, and that third pillar being IMEDS evaluation. All along, FDA's vision for Sentinel was to allow the tools and the system capabilities to be leveraged across various stakeholder groups other than FDA, including industry, for example. So the goal of IMEDS evaluation really is to apply the lessons learned from what we're getting in our IMEDS methods program, as well as the tools and the capabilities that are used by Sentinel to enable non-FDA stakeholders, again, such as industry, to sponsor safety assessments of their own marketed pharmaceutical products and medical devices. So in terms of how this would be done, assessments would be completed in partnership with and using what we call the IMEDS distributed database. Now, just in the next bullet point, describe a little bit more what that is. And it would be facilitated by what we're calling the IMEDS Operations Center. So the IMEDS distributed database is really intended to describe a partnership that we will have with the various data partners that currently support Mini-Sentinel, work with and through Harvard Pilgrim as part of the Mini-Sentinel network. They would agree to partner also with Reagan-Udall on a voluntary basis to complete the work of IMEDS evaluation using the Mini-Sentinel Common Data Model, not the OMOP Common Data Model, not other common data models, but the Mini-Sentinel Common Data Model and the associated tools using this distributed approach. And why this is important is I think it's fair to say that industry and FDA do want to work more collaboratively as it relates to the safety of marketed products. FDA obviously has Sentinel and all of the associated tools. In order for industry to also work in a very collaborative fashion with the agency, it will be very helpful to open up those tools and open up those data partners to allow those marketers of those products to have the access to the same methods and applying those methods to the identical data sets as FDA currently does and will do in the future as it relates to safety surveillance. So that really is what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to provide those tools or expand the utility of those tools. In terms of IMEDS evaluation, we have identified an organization that's willing to fund. We're still working through the contractual issues now, not really issues, just legalese really. So once that has been finalized, we will be in a position to formally announce what the name of that organization. The goals of the pilot are twofold. One is, and this is really the primary objective, and this is of course why it's listed number one here, is to establish an end-to-end process and the policies that will define how the IMEDS evaluation program will be designed and how it will operate. For example, we can't just permit anybody to go in and ask a query, so we will have to give a lot of thought to governance associated with the program to ensure that there is appropriate scientific oversight to ensure the appropriateness of any query that is potentially asked of the system. The second objective here is to actually ask a query and show that the system works. So the first is to show how we can operationalize it. The second is to show that once we have the systems in place and the policies and the procedures, that we can ask a question and have a response back out of the tool. So in terms of our approach, we are in the process of engaging the data partners. As I indicated before, I think there's 17, maybe 18 data partners currently associated with Mini-Sentinel. Our goal, of course, would be to engage each of those data partners with IMEDS evaluation. We will look to maximize the efficiency of what we're doing by leveraging all the lessons learned as well as all the tools that have already been developed through Harvard Pilgrim and the current Mini-Sentinel program. So we will be collaborating with Harvard Pilgrim, using them as the data coordinating center, with, of course, IMEDS serving as the operations center. And then lastly, these policies and procedures that come out of this initial pilot program obviously will then undergo an additional set of reviews, both from our IMEDS steering committee, our Reagan-Udall Foundation Board of Directors, and I'm certain others as well. So in terms of next steps, we are looking forward to continuing the progress that we've already made with the IMEDS evaluation pilot program. We are in the process of, as I mentioned before, collaborating with the data partners to get them on board and put together contractual relationships with them, as well as Harvard Pilgrim. And our goal, just so that everybody is aware, is we've obviously already kicked off IMEDS evaluation, but once again, we are setting out a pretty aggressive goal, as we did with the transition of the OMOP program to Reagan-Udall. And that aggressive timeline calls for the IMEDS evaluation pilot project to conclude in this calendar year. So that concludes what we have to talk about today with the IMEDS program. I'll now turn it over to Ellen.
So we will have time later for public comment or questions on this. Is there any comments from the board? Any questions on the program? No? Okay, then we move on. Sorry, it's hard to see everyone. So,